I'm cooking my breakfast while we're having the meeting because everything's running behind and I haven't eaten yet. So I'll be here. Just shout at me if you need me. I'm going to put me on mute.
Okay. While we're waiting for people to join, this is Cooking with Matt.
Yes, we're having breakfast. We're having home fried potatoes with an omelet and some toast, but I'll be glad to share if I could virtually.
We promise not to eat much.
Yeah. The St. Matthew's Food Network. I don't see a bunch jumping into the waiting room here, but we'll let them in as we go. So we're going to kind of jump right in. So thanks for joining this morning. A couple of just minor housekeeping. I just have a basic free Zoom account. So Zoom is like 50-50 on whether they're nice to you and let you continue a meeting past 40 minutes or if they kick you out. So if we're still going and it kicks us out, just rejoin and it will let you right back in and we'll just pick up where we left off. Yeah. No big deal. We are recording this Zoom meeting and it will be posted up on St. Matt's YouTube channel, just for a way for those that couldn't join us this morning if they want to hear the update and what's going on. We figured this was an easy way to do it. So just an opportunity because we haven't met in a while to touch base with folks, give you an update on where we're at with the search project process, and to provide a little bit of an overview from the survey results that we did back in February. So an update on the search process. Obviously, none of us saw this nice little pandemic coming. So it kind of knocked us off our game just a little bit temporarily. And so we've kind of got things back rolling. Everybody's kind of settling into the groove and able to kind of get back to picking up other tasks that were on our plates. And then kind of during that as well, which we're pretty excited. We kind of took a little pause in working on the profile and kind of refocused and worked with the vestry. We felt it was the need to recommend that we move forward with getting an interim. And so the vestry asked the search committee to help a little bit with that process. And so we are successfully through that and have Reverend Steve on board, and we see him on the call. So that's awesome. So now we're back in full force to working on the profile. We're getting close. We've pretty much got a good draft of it done. Starting to work on just putting the pictures in, making it look pretty, getting the budget added, those pieces. And then we'll be getting it over to the vestry for approval, hopefully at their next meeting. One piece that is kind of the still unknown, I have reached out to ECM and have asked where they are in the process, and they have not gotten back to me. I did get a side chat during another meeting from Bingham that things are crazy. He's like, I know I owe you an email, but a little busy, get to it when we can. So search committee met yesterday, except Friday. I don't know what day it is, Friday. And have kind of determined we're just going to kind of keep marching forward with our process and we'll keep them informed. And the game plan still is if the timing all comes together and they get their parts done, then we will craft a joint introductory statement and add the campus ministry profile with ours, and it will go out as a advertisement that if somebody is interested in full-time work, they could be interested in both of those positions, or they could be either or. It's not an all or nothing gig because they're very different. And somebody may or may not want to do both, or somebody may or may not be fit or the right fit for both. So we're still keeping that option open, but we're not going to stop and wait for that to make sure it materializes either. So that's kind of the update on where we are and moving forward. So any questions on that piece before we jump into the survey? All right.
Good to know all that's going.
It's,
I mean, you're plowing ahead.
We're trying.
Great.
We are trying to plow ahead. All right, so I'm going to try to do this whole share screen thing. So first I want to put this on play from start. Okay, maybe I don't. All right, all good? You can see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
All right, gotta love technology. And of course, somebody wants to, okay, join. Here comes Bev. All right, welcome Bev. We're just jumping into survey results. Oh, I get rid of this screen. There we go. All right, so the survey was really—
You're muted, Bev. We can't hear you.
really meant as just a snapshot of where we are and who we are, any challenges we might be facing, to give us a really good idea of things that we need to bring forward into the profile and things that the search committee really needs to be aware of and thinking of as we start getting applications and start building the vision of who is the right next rector to lead us where we want to go. Do we know what that is? Do we know who we are and where we want to go? And how do we articulate that clearly to get the right fit? So it starts with listening and listening to the congregation. So we got 53 responses to our survey, which was a pretty good number comparatively. It was about 87% of our worship attendance. And we've got really good confidence. The consulting company that we used was very pleased that our results were statistically accurate within plus or minus 5%. And we'll talk about a couple of the anomalies that we may want to dig into a little bit further as we go. So when we look at just the demographics of who we are as a congregation, some of this we all pretty much knew, and there's a couple little surprises in here. So 58% of our respondents were 65 or older, predominantly female, predominantly white, predominantly with a college education or above, which we've kind of self-described ourselves as an aging congregation. So that part wasn't surprising. The part that was a little surprising in a really good way is that we've talked a lot and we heard a lot in the listening sessions about this concern that St. Matthew's isn't growing because we don't have families and young children, and that we're just aging and people are going to die off and we're going to go away. So one of the things that did come out in the survey is that we are growing. We have 34% of our congregation is new to the congregation within the last 5 years. So we are gaining new members. They just maybe don't stick out as prevalently and making us think of that because they're not in our preconceived idea of how we should be growing. We'll talk more about that too. And then 45% of our congregation has been attending for more than 15 years. So we have a pretty good mix of people who have been there for a long time and some fairly newer folks. 84% attend at least 3 times a month. I don't think this part was a surprise either, but about half of our congregation live less than 5 miles away from the church, which means more than half live more than 5 miles away. Because we're situated at such the far north end of town, we draw from many of the surrounding communities. We know we've got Lynn out in Elmira. We have some people who come in from Junction City. and all kind of around that, those neighboring communities. So we bring people in, but they're not all right there in our backyard, so to speak. And then the distribution between the two services, about 36% attend the 8 a.m. or the Rite 1 service, and 64% the 10 a.m. or Rite 2 service. So we know that 8 a.m. Rite 1, no music, 10 a.m. Rite 2 with music. One of the things that when the search committee got started that I committed to was to attend both services on a fairly regular basis to really get a sense of the differences between the two services. I had predominantly attended the 10 a.m. service, and I noticed pretty quickly they were different, and the people who came to the services were different. It's a different culture between the two groups. And so one of the things that came up in the survey, we got the initial batch of results and went, there's a couple of pieces that were just made us want to ask more questions. So we went back to the consultant and said, hey, can you split this out and tell us the answer to these questions based on the 10 o'clock group's answers and the 8 o'clock group's answers? And it was, we will dive into some of those differences as we go. So one of the things with the survey company, so this tool that we used has been used by thousands of churches across the country. So one of the things they do throughout is not only do they tell us what our results show, but they'll tell us how we compare to other churches. And some of that's kind of interesting as we go as well. So overall, compared to other churches, our theological diversity is very high. We are considered to be somewhat conservative and somewhat settled. You can see the little, our little marker down here. And so it's just to keep in mind as we look at how we welcome change, how we welcome new people, how we approach changes in how we do things, how stuck in our ways are we? And when we talk about where we want to go, if where we want to go is different than where we are, then we need to be thinking about how realistic is that if we're this settled. Do we need to figure out how to become more adaptable to make that successful? So it just tells us a little bit about who we are. So some characteristics of a conservative settled church can be very stable, secure, very dependable, very this is who we are, we just do our thing, we're pretty good at it. At its worst, it can be a little rigid, a little controlling, a little bit system bound. Again, just things to keep in mind as we look at where we're going. So when we look at energy and satisfaction is another key indicator. And this part actually surprised our consultant. For a church in transition that we landed in where people aspire to be in high energy and high satisfaction. So we scored very well there. And like I said, they were very impressed for a church in transition. But they did note that we have a lot of people who are on the fence around a lot of topics. And we'll talk about that as we go. When it came to the drivers, things that drive our energy and satisfaction, we compare pretty equally to other churches in that our top two priorities are the same as 97% of other churches around the country. And we'll talk about those in just a second. So what does a transformational church look like? How do people describe that? That they're inspiring, that they're engaging in worship, flexibility, this is one of those just little bit anomalies that make you go, remember on the previous slide, we talked about how conservative and settled we are as well. So there's a little bit of discrepancy there in how much flexibility versus conservative we really are. That we're inviting, we're open, responsive in decision-making, and enjoy opportunities to serve in the church and the world. So those are some of the characteristics. That's where people strive to be. So the consultant's challenge to us was, during this period of transition, how do we make sure we keep our energy and our satisfaction up and keep people engaged and not lose that momentum? So these are some of the key drivers overall in terms of energy and satisfaction. That there's adequate opportunity to be involved in decision making, that the spirit of the congregation makes people want to get involved, that we support people in ministry and remind them that they make a difference and it takes everybody to run, that we're welcoming of persons from all different walks of life, satisfaction, we provide high quality. I want you to keep this one in mind too, because we'll talk about this one as we go. High quality education that is appropriate to every age and stage of life, that we're willing to adapt our worship to the needs and circumstances. There's input in decision making, and again, about preparing and helping people in their own ministries and discerning their gifts and how they contribute. It was interesting to note with our consultants that this is the first time they have seen the pastor not amongst the key drivers of a congregation, and at the same time to have a high level of shock and grief over the departure of a pastor. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. So this is just a quick snapshot of our overall performance dashboard. We've got a lot of great strengths. Hospitality, good morale, there's fairly low level of conflict, satisfaction with our governance, and spiritual vitality. Some things that we need to just be considering as we build the profile and look at who our next leader will be is this component around education. There was some interesting things that popped up around music, lay ministry. There were a lot of people sitting on the fence around the role of lay ministry. And so we may need to dig a little bit deeper into those to really discern what it is we're looking for, and that will help us shape the characteristics that we'll be looking for in a new rector. So this is some noteworthy differences. I remember I told you we asked the consultant to split out the 8 a.m. and the 10 a.m. So the 8 a.m. group, the Right One group, very high satisfaction. They put a very low value on activity beyond worship. They had a top driver of satisfaction around education at every age and stage. Fairly low theological diversity, pretty conservative, and a above average income in their stewardship that they pledged to the church. On the 10 a.m. side, there was a lot of people on the fence in terms of the things that drive satisfaction. They put a higher value on activity beyond Sunday morning worship. There was, again, a lot of people on the fence in where lay ministry fits in, and how people's gifts are used, how they're identified, how they're built, those kinds of things. The theological diversity for the 10 a.m. group is very high. And that was one of the biggest spreads in terms of very high 10 a.m., very low diversity on the 8 a.m. group. So they were a little closer to the center when it comes to progressive and conservative. And their income giving is also above average. And I think the next slide, yeah. So the national average is 2.5%, and St. Matthew's is above that at 2.83%. So we're above the national average in our stewardship giving, which is nice to know. So the priorities that came out, again, the top two were shared by 97% of other churches who have taken this, and that's making changes to attract new people. And this came out really high in our listening groups as well. And the consultant really, I will tell you, this is the one piece of our meeting with the consultant that kind of blew the mind of the search committee, that really changed the way we thought about this. Is there's been this, we kept hearing a lot of talk around families and young children, and that's the only way we're going to grow and be sustaining as a congregation. And when the consultant said, remember back to your demographics, that 34% of your congregation has been attending less than 5 years. that's growth. Who are those people? And they're certainly not families with young children. And so he said, I would challenge you as a congregation to redefine what growth means, and maybe try not to eat that elephant all at one time, but start by attracting one generation younger than your majority now. And then progressively see how that goes. But there's a lot of things that come into play, and we think it comes into play in that education question as well around. Go ahead, Steve.
What is the majority now?
50s and 60s.
Okay.
I think I laughed at the consultant. I think I was the youngest one of the bunch at 40 something.
Mm-hmm.
So, but one of the things that we asked a lot during the listening sessions was, if I were brand new to town and I met you on the street corner and said, I am a 25-year-old married family with 2 young kids, what's the best Episcopal church for me? And we got pretty consistent answers when we asked that in the group. And we asked kind of a variety of that. I'm a 40-something, single, professional, where's the best fit? And so we kept challenging the congregation to say, what is the question that makes us answer without a doubt St. Matthew's? Matt's breakfast is ready. So, because along with it, there's kind of this, I don't know if it's a yearning, a nostalgia to days before I attended St. Matthew's, when there was a thriving preschool and a group of kids that kind of grew up together and then progressed on out of that age group. And that takes a lot of work. Who runs it? Who develops the curriculum? Is it worth it for 1 or 2? How long does that take to grow? Is it sustainable? Versus if our true goal is maintaining growth and sustaining the congregation, then maybe looking at who we're appealing to in a different lens. So it was a fascinating discussion that goes right along with that number 2 of reaching new people, and how we do that. Number 7 and 13 on our list stood out simply in comparison to other churches, and that we should consider digging a little bit deeper into those. So healing ministries was very low compared to other churches, and worship music was very high as a priority compared to other churches.
What were the questions about worship music? Were they about how important it is, or what kind it is, or?
It was mostly about how important it was, and did we feel we had high quality. Mm-hmm. And keep in mind again that the 8 a.m. group has no music at all during Rite 1. And during the listening sessions, we explored this question a little bit as well. The 10 a.m. group really likes music, and there's been a variety over the last many years, again, before my attendance. And one of the things that came out wasn't that we had bad music, is that our current music leader is very gifted instrumentally, but not a strong vocal leader. And that not having a strong vocal lead makes it very difficult for the group to follow along. And if the instrument isn't played in that very steady, try to keep people on the beat with the music, we get lost pretty frequently. And sometimes it's a good thing God doesn't care what we sound like. Say that. So I think that's one of the things that kind of came out of the listening session, and how this played into it was a sense that we need a strong vocal leader to help kind of bring that back on track. So how does that play out when we look at the transition, and what abilities would we be looking at in a new rector? So one thing that came out very, very clearly in the survey was that our congregation is sensing a high level of loss and anxiety, that 90% of people did not feel that it was time for a change. And based on the timing of the survey and how recent it was to our former rector's departure, people didn't think it was time for a change, and were like, okay, so we want exactly what we had before. And so that kind of led to some of that not starting to think about change or where we're going, but how do we just dig in and get exactly what we had before. So that'll be interesting as it kind of plays out as we get past that. But it's something that we need to be considering over the next few months of how we help the congregation grieve, essentially, and get past the sense of loss, and how do we begin to get ready for the opportunity of new and change in order to make our search and that ultimate transition successful. And so we focus the listening sessions a lot on identify characteristics and outreach, things, tangible skills and abilities, and tried to limit direct comparisons to a person. So things that came out were preaching was very important, an engaging sermon that ties us to the message, pastoral care, strategic leadership, and administration. You'll see in number 2 and number 6, the consultant made a point to say those came out very high in comparison to other churches, that for a congregation that wants a lot of education and preaching and those kinds of things, that it seemed administration and day-to-day tasks ranked a lot higher than they would have expected and higher than other churches. And that may be a component of looking at and comparing to what the previous rector did. We've made some changes organizationally since then, and now that we have a part-time secretary who's handling some more of the day-to-day administration, and again, starting to think beyond, if the pastor isn't doing administration things, what other things can they do? And then the pastoral care, that came out a lot in our listening sessions, again, as the overall feeling of us being an aging congregation and a fear. There's a lot of anxiety with the departure and during this time of transition, that if some of our older members of the congregation were to become injured or ill or dying or hospitalized, who would be there to minister to them? And so that may have inflated this just slightly, that sense of anxiety and loss. And so we kind of boiled down into our vital leader profile, some things that we've included in our profile to really hopefully pique the interest of any of our applicants. This is kind of what we're looking for. The abilities of excellent preaching, education for all ages and stages. Again, we need to dive into that a little bit more. And what does that really look like? Is this some of that a holdover to this nostalgia of a preschool and kids ministry? Or are there elements of ongoing Bible study or diving into the Episcopal faith or a multitude of other things of our current membership? How do we reshape the ministry to reach and incorporate others into the life of the church, help members discern their gifts, call and equip members for ministry and leadership, and help us be a little bit more open and flexible so that we can be adaptable to that change and shifting our ideas of where we're going and what it is that we need to grow and thrive a little bit. Professional interests have a variety of theological perspectives and can engage in those conversations. Again, a very huge difference between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock in that theological diversity, and whoever our rector will be is going to need to be able to converse easily with both of those groups. but also maintain sort of the overall, this is the theological perspective of the church. Be able, knowledgeable about a pastoral sized church and what dynamics it brings, and what resources and things are there, that we're not a super community-based congregation. We do have half of our members outside of that 5-mile range. So we're more of a regional-based group, and knowing the differences along that as well. So some motivators, long-term, enjoys multiple tasks, fairly self-directed, wide range of services, assigns responsibility, delegates, recognizes people's contributions, seeks input, talked about the regionally based a little bit, moderate in theological perspective, a high level of vitality, ways to sustain and share many gifts. Rate of giving is high. So what does that look like in terms of growing, and any other growth that would require a significant effort in planning? Some things to be on their radar. And that's kind of the big overview of what came out of the survey. So we've incorporated a good chunk of that into our profile in terms of that description of who we are, and the skills and abilities that we're looking for. So any questions? So I have this nice little, in 8 minutes, you're going to get kicked off.
It's very interesting stuff. I'd love to get a copy of that.
Sure. It's a lot of, I'd actually be happy to meet with you, Steve, and go over it in much more detail. There's some of it that there's some explanation from other materials that the consultant gave us, that if you read them independently, don't always make a lot of sense.
Right. Well, I'm interested particularly in, sounds like we need some way to do some lamenting.
And that's one of the things we talked about in a meeting I had with the diocese as well, and how they could help us. We were going to do a congregational vitality workshop, and it got canceled with this crisis. But they gave us the name of one of the consultants the diocese uses that's here in Eugene, that may be worth having a conversation about in terms of a way or a process that could kind of move us through that sense of loss and grief and becoming ready. And we just haven't got that far yet.
I actually talked to Carol Sedlacek yesterday about that, and she is going to work on maybe getting what would have been the congregational vitality workshop reset as an individual conversation with our parish sometime in early June.
Cool. And Nisa did send me the name of the guy here locally as well.
Yeah. So between those two, I think it's fairly likely that by the end of next month, we should be starting to plan for how that will actually work.
Cool.
And you all seem to be, from my point of view, a number of you send me notes about people who need a call and so on, so that I have a sense that a lot of you are looking out for each other. But that loss of a sense of pastoral care can kind of freeze everything. And part of that is, having a pastor. Another part of that is sharing that more broadly in the life of the parish. Some efforts at making people spiritual companions to each other, whether it's small groups or visitation, or there are lots and lots of ways. But
yeah, that's one thing that was noted during our work so far, is that when the last profile was done, there was a lot of small group activity and small groups meeting, and those have kind of fallen away and have transitioned. And one of the things that came up was in that as people age or move or transition, we're good at the hospitality piece on Sunday morning, but how do you break so the group doesn't fall away altogether, but also so it doesn't become super cliquish. And if our priority is to incorporate and bring new people into the congregation, how do we integrate them into those other components of our congregational life outside of Sunday morning?
Well, and one of the ways to do that is to have some experienced small group leaders who are willing to be in more than one group, who, so that every 4 months, 6 months or something, a new group gets organized. Doesn't have to be forever, but a new group gets organized for a while so that people can get into that kind of experience, which does wonders for a sense of belonging and being cared about. And it also happens to be one of the best ways to grow in your faith. So I love it for that.
And the good thing is we could even do that now. I mean, we do not have to wait until we've gone all the way down this search process road.
Right.
That's right. And even in our virus isolation, that's a very doable thing. I think you all know I'm going right now to, was and will be going to St. Paul's in Salem. And I'll miss half the choir season this year because I'm with you guys. But that parish, when the isolation began, decided and has tried to implement that every group that meets continues to meet on Zoom. Even the choir is meeting every week. Not that we can sing, but that we are meeting just to do a check-in with each other during our usual rehearsal time. And so, you've got 2 screens full on Zoom. It's a pretty funny situation. And my, Monday morning Bible study, we're all getting together that way. It's not impractical to be starting small groups now. And it's really probably pretty likely that people will join them too.
All right. It looks like we're about to get kicked off. Happy to continue this conversation. People just need to jump back in because that tends to be what happened. But so fair warning, it says less than a minute.
Anymore? We're extending the limit.
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I've had both where I've gotten a, hey, congratulations, keep going, or nope, you're out. So we'll see. I don't know what my luck's like today.
Usually when you get the minutes warning, you're going to get kicked off.
Yeah, that's the first time I've ever seen that particular little thing. But yeah, so those are the things that kind of came out, is figuring out what that looks like and how we support each other. And then this whole thing happened, right? The pandemic happened and has changed that dynamic sort of even more, and different components, and just everybody's in a different spot. That's another realization that has hit me recently, is I was having trouble. I mean, I logically understood it, and I understood where people were coming from the perspective of, we're an aging congregation, and if our older members are hurt or have health issues, or we're hospitalized, that sense of pastoral care. But that wasn't super applicable to me. So I was like, I get that, but I'm exploring some things and getting involved. And as I've started leading evening prayer, and I'm like, wait a minute, I could use some pastoral care, but in a whole different context. In how do I grow, and I need St. Matthew's support if I want to become a licensed lay preacher, or these other components of growing my lay ministry that are very different than how I've thought of pastoral care before.